Welcome to Telesur. This is from the south, from our studios here in Quito, Ecuador. I'm Carla Gonzalez. Let's begin with our stories. Let's begin with Mexico. On Saturday, Andrés Manuel López Obrador was sworn in as president at a ceremony in Congress with various heads of state. Former President Enrique Peña Nieto removed his presidential sash and handed it to the president of the Congress, who then presented it to López Obrador. He was sworn in and has begun his 6-year term, with his party holding strong majorities in Congress.
I swear to defend the Constitution of the United Mexican States and its laws, and faithfully and patriotically carry out the post of President of the Republic that the people have entrusted to me.
Universal. La cuarta transformación política de México.
Today, we begin the fourth political transformation of Mexico. It may seem pretentious or exaggerated, but today, not only does a new government begin, but also a change of political regime begins.
Un cambio de régimen político.
During his speech, López Obrador also thanked historical, social, and political leaders in his country.
Today, those who started this movement, those who planted what today we're reaping, social leaders, politicians, many who were ahead of us, but they were the precursors of this fight, of this movement. We will never forget you.
And on Saturday afternoon, massive crowds gathered in Mexico City's Zócalo Square, where AMLO was inaugurated by indigenous leaders and social movements. Representatives of Mexico's 68 distinct indigenous peoples participated in this event. López Obrador is the first president to take part in a traditional indigenous cleansing ceremony as part of his inauguration. So let's take a look at some of the names included in his cabinet.
Olga Sánchez Cordero Dávila is the new government secretary. She's a lawyer who graduated from the National Autonomous University of Mexico. Between 1995 and 2015, she was a jurist of the Supreme Court of Justice. She holds progressive views for her positions on women's rights to abortion and same-sex marriage laws. Marcelo Ebrard Casaubon is the new Minister of Foreign Affairs. He was Mexico City's Secretary of Public Safety when López Obrador was mayor. He worked to approve same-sex marriage and worked to pass a law for the decriminalization of abortion. Ebrard Casaubon was an external collaborator for the presidential campaign of U.S. Democrat candidate Hillary Clinton. Carlos Manuel Ursúa Macías is the new Minister of Finance. He was Mexico City's Secretary of Finance during the administration of López Obrador, a period in which he promoted more benefit measures for pensioners. During his professional life, he worked for the World Bank, for ECLAC, for the United Nations, and the Organization for Cooperation and Economic Development. Graciela Márquez Colín is the new Minister of Economy. She's an academic and economist. In 2002, she received her PhD from Harvard University in Economic History. Her PhD dissertation was awarded the Gershon Prize in 2002 by the Economic History Association. She's an expert in the areas of economic history, protectionism, fiscal policy, and the economics of contemporary Mexico.
And López Obrador takes office in a country that has high levels of violence, disappearances, and femicide, as well as widespread poverty and the unresolved issues of corruption and human rights abuses. Let's find out more.
With a promise of real change, Andrés Manuel López Obrador won the support of more than 30 million Mexicans, 53% of those who voted on July 1st. The politician from the state of Tabasco will govern a country plagued by violence. The last 6 years have seen 120,000 murders and at least 37,000 disappearances. Most of these cases have never been solved.
Those of us working here know that it could be 37,000 just here in Tamaulipas. It is an unimaginable tragedy.
The That's why, during the transition period, López Obrador made a point of meeting with relatives of the victims. He asked for their support in developing policies to combat crime.
We need to address the causes of the violence, tackle the lack of justice, and investigate the profound abuse of human rights in our country.
As part of his plan to bring peace to Mexico, he will set up a National Guard, made up of military, naval, and federal police officers. It's proven a controversial policy.
80% of any plan to bring peace and security to the country depends on what we do in terms of development, in terms of economic growth, jobs, and welfare for our people. The other 20% of tackling insecurity and violence has to do with stopping corruption in the police forces, in the military, among judges, and among prosecutors.
He has promised to govern austerely. The Congress passed his initiative to cut government salaries. No member of the administration will be allowed to earn more than the president, whose salary will be 60% lower than that of his predecessor.
It is not just the maximum salary tied to that of the president, but putting a stop to the very high, illegal, and abusive incomes, which have turned this into a country of privileges.
Fighting corruption will be one of the main pillars of his government. It should give him an extra $25 billion to spend on the social programs he promised in his campaign, in which he submitted to a public consultation.
We have supported and will continue to support this approach, this policy of consulting the people, so that as a well-informed population we can work together to develop a new way of governing.
His policy proposals include giving training to 2.6 million young people, doubling benefits for senior citizens, combating the poverty that affects 53.4 million Mexicans, as well as developing infrastructure in the southeast of the country and rebuilding the oil industry, which has seen its production levels sink to the lowest in 20 years.
Let's take a look at other issues affecting Mexico. A group from a Central American caravan migrant is on hunger strike at Tijuana's border crossing, hoping to pressure the United States to expedite their asylum requests. Migrants fleeing violence and poverty were hoping to gain entry to the U.S. However, the administration of President Donald Trump has taken a hardline stance by militarizing the southern border. He has labeled the migrant camp as an invasion and has urged the Mexican government to keep them there while their asylum claims are processed. Members of the caravan were recently transferred by bus to a shelter miles away from the border in a dangerous neighborhood of Tijuana. The temporary shelter at the Benito Juárez Sports Complex has been shut down by authorities. Officials will no longer be offering food and medical care at the facility. Thousands of migrants had stayed at the shelter, which became unsanitary following heavy rains and flooding. But many are refusing to move to this new shelter because it is located in one of the most dangerous parts of Tijuana. Some say the new location stands in the way of their efforts to request asylum as a collective. Instead, they are camping outside the closed shelter. Our correspondent Alina Duarte has more on this issue.
We continue here in the border city of Tijuana, a few meters away from the border crossing known as El Chaparral. Here, 15 migrants are holding a hunger strike which began on November 29th. They are demanding that the government of the United States receive their asylum requests in a shorter period of time. There are hundreds more who also send their asylum requests. However, authorities don't have the capacity of processing the requests in a timely manner, making things more difficult for the migrants.
That was Alina Duarte from Mexico. And the new president and its first official act in government is a program to address the migrant crisis. It will include a coordinated operation between the three levels of government in Mexico, and also with his Central American neighbors. The plan will include a review of shelters and the reinforcement of security measures around Central America and within Mexico. On Saturday night, López Obrador said that the provision of basic supplies and a decent place to stay would be necessary. More stories coming up. We'll be back with more.
The ruling world order has always subjugated the masses. But who are the actors behind every move? What are their real interests? We analyze every move on Critical Move. Weekdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Following the G20 summit in Argentina, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is on an official tour of Latin America. After a stop in Paraguay, he arrived in Venezuela early on Monday, where he's set to meet President Nicolas Maduro. Both leaders would reportedly sign several agreements and hold a joint press conference. This is the first visit to Venezuela by a Turkish head of state. We continue in Venezuela as the December 9th municipal elections approach. The president of the National Electoral Court has confirmed that preparations are running smoothly.
So far, we have already executed 85% of the process for the election, particularly the delivery of machines. We finished the production of all material necessary, and voting machines are already going out to the regions. On Tuesday, we will go to schools, and by Friday, we will install electoral tables. So, if anything is missing, we have until Saturday to correct it. All in all, by Friday, we will have all our tables ready for Sunday 6 a.m. The Electoral Bureau, as established by the law.
We move to Honduras, where President Juan Orlando Hernández has been accused of leading an alleged criminal network that embezzles public funds. During the testimony of Fernando Suárez, one of the accused in the Pandora corruption scandal, he implicated the president and his late sister as the masterminds behind the embezzlement. This was allegedly taking place during Juan Orlando Hernández's tenure as president of Congress. Suárez also asked that he and his family be protected, given that they've received threats from the president's brother, who was recently arrested in the U.S. on drug trafficking. One of the members of the police force involved in the murder of Mapuche member Camilo Catrillanca in Chile has claimed that he was forced to lie and give false testimony. Carlos Alarcón said during a video shared on social media that there are facts from the case that haven't yet come to light. He denies having acted as a criminal during the raid on Temucucuy on November 14th and highlighted that he does not want the national police to be tarnished by this scandal.
Some things are yet to come to light. Those of you that know us know we do not act like criminals. You know none of us are criminals. There are people who force us to lie, to give false testimony, and we have become the worst of the worst, the evil of society.
More than 20,000 Cuban doctors developed their training in Brazilian universities who were part of the More Doctors program. Let's find out how they trained.
Brazilian lecturers and trainers recognize that the Cuban doctors have a wealth of international experience and have already specialized in a particular area, but are undertaking further professional development.
There is respect for humanity, diversity, and people. That's what makes them different. That's not taught in medical school. It's a human and civil process in Cuban education, in their political and social education about the need to care for human beings. When they speak about solidarity, people don't understand if they haven't experienced living in Cuba.
Brazilian President-elect Jair Bolsonaro soon cast doubt on the professionalism of Cuban doctors and in particular the quality of their qualifications.
We had the opportunity to offer specialization courses at the main medical universities in Brazil. During 5 years of collaboration, more than 20,000 Cuban doctors have been approved and were certified to practice medicine here in Brazil.
We were trained in Brazil by Brazilian professors, both in the language and in medicine. And if you didn't pass, you couldn't get into the More Doctors program.
The doctors graduated from the Latin American School of Medicine of La Habana, and they recalled their experience there, which has been training doctors for 2 decades.
It was a fantastic experience to work with them, for the exchange of experiences and knowledge. They were professionals with experience from other countries, on other missions. It was very good to learn from them and to watch how affectionately they deal with patients.
Brazilian patients were treated with compassion by the most experienced and skilled doctors made possible by further training available to them.
Now to Argentina, where the G20 meeting in Buenos Aires has ended, with China's Xi Jinping making some of the most significant diplomatic progress. The Chinese president agreed with U.S. counterpart Donald Trump to declare a temporary truce in their escalated trade war. President Trump decided to restrict planned tariffs on Chinese goods, while the Chinese president promised to buy more U.S. products. President Xi also agreed to deepen trilateral cooperation with Russia and India. Also during the summit, the Russian and Turkish presidents agreed on a series of measures to comply with the demilitarized zone agreement in the Syrian province of Idlib. Vladimir Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdogan agreed that not all extremists are meeting the demand to leave. According to the Russian Chancellor Sergei Lavrov, they will work with Turkey to ensure that the agreement is enforced and prevent armed groups from breaking it. The Syrian armed conflict dates back to March 2011. Idlib is one of the last rebel-held areas, which the Syrian government aims to regain in order to declare outright victory. And as we look at this G20 summit coming to a close, social organizations have taken to the streets to reject the presence of the world's most powerful and their neoliberal policies.
Peoples from around Argentina and around the world gathered in Buenos Aires to take to the streets in demonstrations against the G20 summit. They took on the task of confronting the world's most powerful.
This People's Summit aims to let them know that they are in fact reinforcing the attacks on the world's working population. Macri has said that he wants to discuss how this government can advance with labor reform. He's putting that ahead of youth and also ahead of workers. It seems that for them this is the only way that has occurred to them as a way to get out of this capitalist crisis. Of course, they are going to fail.
Their protests were reflected on hundreds of banners and posters that said no to the G20, down with the International Monetary Fund, and Trump and other imperialist leaders out. Protesters marched in defiance of threats by the Argentine government, despite the government's warnings that it would repress protesters.
In a city that has been emptied and militarized, it's very important that people demonstrated to say to those who think they own the planet that we don't want a world where the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. We don't want a world where people have to go from country to country looking for work and trying to find their way out of hunger. We don't want them to continue to make plans which worsen the situation. That's why we are here on the streets.
More than 22,000 security policemen were mobilized in order to shield the capital of Argentina. Despite the difficulty of reaching the city's downtown, the protest exceeded all expectations. Activists and people from all over the world came to Buenos Aires to be present and march against the most powerful.
This is a very important and momentous mobilization for workers because this G20 is going to discuss the future of work, but workers aren't invited to the discussion. This is why I say G20 out.
Here we have the social movements and workers of Latin America to tell the world that another world is possible, and that the strategy lies in Latin America unity and the peoples of the world.
More than 100 social organizations marched to the perimeter of the National Congress, where a document rejecting the G20's leader forum was read aloud. Their message was no to the model of looting and exclusion that concentrates more and more resources in fewer hands and forces people of the world into hunger.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has landed in Panama City, the first historical state visit since the two countries established diplomatic relations in 2017. The city has been adorned with national flags of Panama and China. The announcement of his visit was met with a frenzy by locals who hope for increased business opportunities. Panama wants to be part of China's Belt Road Initiative and pave the way to the rest of Latin America. We now go to Bolivia, where candidate registration for the 2019 primary elections has ended. The process has revealed a division within the right-wing opposition movements. We have more.
The Supreme Electoral Court has registered 9 parties and political alliances to participate in the primary elections of January 2019.
This marks a broad participation of several political organizations. Electoral participation is always something that strengthens democracy. We salute the fact that there are many parties registered for the upcoming primary elections.
Since 2016, when the opposition won a referendum, they promised to join together. But during the registration for the primary elections, the alliance between two opposition leaders was shattered. Businessman Samuel Doria Medina of National Unity and the governor of Santa Cruz, Ruben Costas of the Democratic Party.
I think they didn't realize that the alliance was between the National Unity Democrats and our candidate Samuel Doria Medina. However, when they said no to Samuel Doria Medina, Samuel proposed Ruben Costas from the National Unity to be the candidate.
The socialist movement postulates the re-election of President Evo Morales and his vice president Alvaro Garcia. They are seeing the opposition fragmentation as something positive.
It is a clear sign that the Bolivian right-wing opposition has no alternative. They have no proposals for the country. It is clear that the political process promoted by President Morales is a revolutionary process that has liberated Bolivia.
On December the 8th, the Supreme Electoral Court will announce how many of the 9 registered members will continue in the run-up to the primary elections on January 27. The general elections will be held in October of 2019.
We're taking one last break, but stay with us.
Telesur brings you special interviews with social and political personalities. Monday, from Washington. Tuesday, from Mexico. Wednesday, from Caracas. Thursday, from Quito. Friday, from Havana. Analysis about our continent's reality. Weekdays, only on Telesur.
And we're back. The far-right Vox party in Spain has won 12 seats in parliament during elections in Andalusia. It's the first time that the far-right has managed to win so many seats since the country's return to democracy in the late 1970s. Socialists received the most votes but failed to secure an overall majority. As nationalism sweeps through the country, popular parties on the left are struggling to maintain their grip. The United Nations has urged for a humanitarian ceasefire in Yemen's key port of Hodeida to allow aid to reach Yemenis on the brink of famine. The UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs has been in Saudi Arabia to discuss Yemen and the looming crisis with the Saudi-led coalition. He urged all sides to take action within Yemen's borders and welcome humanitarian relief efforts after Saudi Arabia and the UAE announced an aid package of $500 million. The COP24 is underway in Poland. Thousands of people have taken to the streets in Brussels, urging the Belgian government to act upon its commitments on limiting greenhouse gas emissions. Rallying under the slogan, "Claim the Climate," some 65,000 people marched in the Belgian capital. They called on the government to pledge using more renewable energy, build more cycling paths, and improve air quality through a socially driven transition. And about 25,000 people have protested in the Georgian capital of Tbilisi, rejecting the outcome of the country's presidential election. The winning politician Salome Zurabishvili has backed by the ruling party and is set to become Georgia's first female president. But her main opponents said that the election was a criminal farce and called for snap parliamentary elections. Opposition parties are considering to challenge this result on the courts. And that brings us to the end of this news brief, but as you know, this and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on StarSat on 461 and in South Africa and in Nigeria also in 539. Be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram. I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching Telesur, connecting the Global South.